Okay, welcome back, Senate Government Operations on Friday, the 31st of March. As I just said, I'll say it again, we're shifting gears to H 429 related to miscellaneous election laws. And we have Betty Keller, who should be joining us from the League of Women Voters on Zoom. Hey, Betty. Thank you for your patience and thanks for coming back. We're sorry we had to cancel you the other day. It's been a really crazy busy week on the floor for us. Thanks for joining us on this Friday afternoon. As I said, we're talking about H 429 and just wanted to hear if you had any thoughts or things you wanted us to think about in relation to that bill.
I definitely do, and thank you so much for inviting me to come and speak for the League of Women Voters of Vermont on this. So good afternoon, Chair Hardy and all of you on this committee. I'm Betty Keller of St. Johnsbury, representing the League of Women Voters of Vermont. And thank you for the opportunity to speak about the miscellaneous changes in elections proposed in H 429. And I'd like to go through the bill in the order of the different sections that I would like to address. And so the first two sections I'll talk about together, they raise similar concerns, so I'll address them together. So section 117 VSA 2381, that's the one about not allowing a candidate who lost a major party nomination to then appear on the general election ballot as the candidate of another party. So that one, and also section 217 2401, and that's the same idea of not allowing a candidate who lost a major party nomination to then appear on the general election ballot as an independent candidate. So the Vermont House appears concerned about the risk of a candidate who fails to win the primary election of a party to then split the vote of candidates who share similar values and positions. The correct solution to this is actually ranked choice voting, as this committee has recognized and performed much great work in crafting S32. This bill from the House comes from a completely different direction and would actually limit the function of ranked choice voting by reducing the number of candidates that would be on the general election ballot, limiting the voters' choices. The League of Women Voters of Vermont opposes those proposals. I would like to remind the committee that the intent of a primary election is for party members to choose who they would like to represent their party in the general election. And then the point of the general election is for all voters to choose who they would like to represent them in each office. The primary election is not supposed to be a government-sanctioned opportunity to give people who belong to political parties the opportunity to limit the choice of all the other voters. Each party has diversity, so a candidate who failed to win the primary of the party whose nomination they initially sought might still appeal not only to almost half of their party, but perhaps also to members of another party, as well as perhaps a large number of independent voters. The League of Women Voters of Vermont sees this legislation as primarily benefiting political parties and incumbents and not benefiting voters nor Vermont as a whole. And we urge you to remove these two sections from the bill. At the very least, we would want to see language added to sunset these provisions for offices that are elected to will be elected by ranked choice voting in the future. Consistent with that message above, the League of Women Voters of Vermont would like to see the deadline for candidates to file a consent of candidacy form for the general election, either as an independent or for a different party, to be at least 10 days after the primary election has been held. This would make it easier for candidates to still run, even if they didn't win the election of the party whose nomination they first sought. I'd like to remind you that there is a right for citizens to seek office, and there is a right for voters to have choices regarding who will represent them. And these two rights are both articulated in our state constitution, and these provisions go against those. The next section I'd like to address is related to campaign contributions, and you've heard quite a bit about this already. And the concern I have is that last section about notwithstanding subdivision A of this subdivision 5, a political party may accept not more than $60,000 from a candidate for state office. And if I understand this correctly, this creates a new category of donor, candidates for state office. The League of Women Voters of Vermont does not see a valid argument for why these individuals should have the opportunity to donate more to their party than the rest of us. We're also concerned about the lack of transparency when all the money donated to a single candidate is then attributed to that person, while it may actually come from additional sources that are not named. We recognize the current laws regarding campaign financing needs some work, and the Vermont Senate has been trying to address this without success recently. However, this proposal is going in the wrong direction. Perhaps a study including members of both chambers could find some common ground, but the Ranked Choice Voting Study Committee is far more urgent. It would be better to delay this and leave it as is than to make this change. The last section I wish to discuss today is a section on electronic voting. The League of Women Voters of Vermont supports making voting accessible to all voters and also supports both voter privacy and the security of the election. These values are sometimes at odds, as other witnesses have been testifying. The most important change we would like to see is making voting more accessible to military, overseas, and disabled voters by allowing their mailed paper ballots to count so long as they are postmarked by the day of the election. The blank ballots can be transmitted to them electronically, but then they print them, fill them out, look them over, and mail them back. And I would really like to see that added to this bill. The League of Women Voters encourages every effort in verifying the accuracy of the vote. Auditing is, of course, more challenging when there's an electronic device between the voter and the printed paper ballot, which the voter cannot see before it is counted. But we encourage efforts to create processes by which some portion of ballots could be verifiable. The League of Women Voters encourages limiting the use of electronic ballots to those who truly need them. Every voter who requests electronic ballot returns must be advised of security risk. Military members in areas of battle, in submarines, and in similar circumstances in which mailboxes are not accessible to them should be allowed to use an electronic ballot return when the security of the devices and the transmission are assessed insufficient. I frankly, picturing the use, have trouble picturing how they get one of these secure devices to them on the battlefield, but that's for someone else to look over. However, a stateside military voter who has easy access to a post office box should not. People who are blind and have equipment at home to assist them in voting with privacy should be allowed to use it. But just as people must meet criteria to justify a plate or placard for parking in spots for disabled people, eligibility for electronic ballot returns should have criteria set by the Secretary of State. Many people with mobility disabilities can use a mail-in ballot. The League of Women Voters of Colorado completed a study on election security in 2022, and I have not sent in my written testimony yet. I was trying to add in the references and having trouble with the formatting, so I'll get that reference in there for you. But it's a good little document with references of its own on there. I'd like to share with you one of the requirements that they included in their study, providing equitable voting access. When a voter would otherwise be disenfranchised, we should work diligently to provide a voting method which is as secure as possible under the circumstances. If allowing less secure voting methods such as online ballot return, limit use to the rare situation in which a voter cannot physically use and return a voter verifiable paper ballot. Voters should be warned that all online methods will be less private as well as less secure. So this position that they developed after their study included that states should develop and rehearse contingency plans for disasters and cybersecurity recovery. The League of Women Voters of Vermont encourages including language that could provide a safety valve in the event of untoward events. This may require creating authority for the Secretary of State to withhold the opportunity for returning ballots electronically, to hold those ballots separate until a problem is resolved, and potentially to allow a voter whose ballot may have been compromised to either cure the ballot or to have the ballot discarded and to vote again with a reasonable time frame permitted for the voter's circumstance. Events that may trigger the Secretary of State's office to invoke such authority might include inability to provide access to approved electronic devices able to accomplish the task securely, evidence from an audit suggesting the system is not printing out ballots that accurately depict the voter's choices, credible information suggesting that the electronic system has malfunctioned in other jurisdictions and the problem has not been resolved, or credible information suggesting that the system has been hacked. If electronic ballot return is permitted, there must be language about what happens to election results if a problem arises, or language allowing the Secretary of State to have discretion in addressing a problem. Such discretion should also be accompanied by guardrails. And this is actually something we need to address even if we aren't doing electronic ballot returns. For instance, you'll recall the disaster that we had right before Christmas this year with a lot of power out and the dangerous roads. You'll recall, Irene a few years ago. Can you imagine if we were trying to do elections in the middle of that? We don't have contingency plans that I'm aware of for what we do if that were to, something like that were to happen on election day. And then you figure the potential for terrorist acts, homegrown or otherwise, on election day, and it seems that we should have contingency plans developed. So I'll be turning in my written testimony with those references on them, and that's all I had to share today.
Great, thank you, Betty. You have not sent your stuff in yet, but you will. Is that what I just heard?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. We have a question in the room, Senator Bihovsky.
Yeah, thank you for your testimony, Betty. One of the things that we've heard around sort of the challenge with auditing electronic ballots is the sort of anonymity of transmitting ballots. And so how would we know if it didn't match the votes cast, because we don't know who cast it and they don't see it before we see it? So I guess I'm wondering if you're suggesting that one of the ways in which we might have to move forward with something like electronic balloting is by getting rid of the understanding of anonymity.
So I've given some thought to this, but I don't have an expert's background on this. But as I think through it, one thing is that if we're really only talking about 1,000 or 2,000 ballots is what we're talking about right now, that we could cut a little chase on it while we're trying to figure this out. And I would not, want to reduce people's anonymity in their vote over such small numbers with such small risk. I had been thinking, well, gee, there's so little risk of somebody hacking when it's only 1,000 or 2,000. And I thought, wait, this company actually serves other states, so they could. There's enough volume other ways that there may be some incentive to go ahead and try hacking. So right now, I haven't physically seen what these devices look like, and I'm sure that there are a number of different ones depending on what the disability and the situation is. But for instance, the person, say you're overseas and you type in what it would be, and then you send it in. So at the other end, somebody's getting a ballot. And right now, when people send in a mail-in ballot, somebody opens that and feeds it through a machine, and you don't know whether they're actually reading or not, but you're trusting that these two people in the room are thoughtfully not looking at it as it goes. So can somebody thoughtfully not look at it as they photocopy it and send the photocopy to the voter to verify that this is what it was without looking at it? Can you trust that people would do that? Is there some way to design the software that you could put it on a scanner and this would be completed? I don't have the technology to know what the choices would be and to know, what it looks like now, but it would seem to me worth continuing the research, continuing the process to try to develop verifiable opportunities. The other thing is that there might be some voters who would volunteer and say, I don't mind having my ballot seen by my clerk. I want to know that my ballot says what I said, so I want to see what you got on your end. So there could be some voluntary means of verifying. Of course, if the machinery, if the hackers have figured out what we're doing to find out whether people want to allow verification, then they can arrange their software to avoid those people in the audit that will be audited. So there's a lot of work to do around it. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I think we are going to get more testimony on sort of methods that have been used for security and auditing of ballots. So I think we're going to leave it there for now. And if you could send in and with the links that you mentioned, that would be helpful. And thank you for joining us this afternoon. And I'm sorry, we have to move on because I don't want to lose my.
I know you're late.
Witnesses here in the room. So thank you so much.
Okay, great.
Take care.
Thank you. You take care.
Excellent. So we're gonna move on. We have Josh Ronsky. Hey, Josh, and we're gonna just introduce ourselves for you and Paul who are in the room, and is Jim on Zoom right now? Okay, and so we'll just do it for both of you, and then we won't have to do it twice. So I'm Senator Ruth Hardy. I'm from the Addison District.
Olivia Parker, County Assistant.
Senator Tanya Vihovsky, Chittenden Central.
And Rebecca White, Windsor County District.
Bob Norris, Franklin.
And Watson, Washington District.
Allison Clarkson, Windsor County District.
Wonderful. Excellent. So why don't you tell us what you'd like us to hear about 429?
Yeah, so thanks so much. Yeah, thank you to Senator Hardy and all of the members of the committee for the opportunity to testify on the miscellaneous elections bill. My name is Josh Ronsky. I'm the executive director of the Vermont Progressive Party. And I've been in this position since 2016. So I've been active in coordinating elections activities through 4 Vermont primary and general elections, in addition to 7 town meeting day elections. So I've been around for a little bit. I have a number of thoughts on the proposed changes in the elections bill that I would like to share, in addition to also some ideas for ways the legislation could be improved. So I'll start off with the store loser provision. This change is something that we definitely oppose. I've heard the argument from Representative McCarthy and other members of the House Committee on Government Operations that running in a party primary is a really significant choice a candidate chooses to make, and they should not be allowed to run in the general election if they lose that nomination. As a party leader, I also understand the frustration when someone chooses to run in your primary, loses, and then runs as an independent or under a different party banner. We have experienced that exact scenario on several occasions at the local level, and it's not fun for anybody. That said, we also strongly believe in enhancing ballot access and not restricting it. We do not think we should be afraid of more candidates appearing on the general election ballot. Primaries are for major party members to choose their nominees for the general election. They should not be a way for a party to prevent a candidate from appearing on the general election ballot. We know that voter turnout more than doubled between the Vermont primary and general election in 2022, with 133,578 people voting in the primary and 291,955 people voting in the general election. If the candidate is looking to run in the general election and also seeks a party nomination, we should not deny the more than 150,000 Vermonters who choose to vote in general elections from weighing in on that candidate. In the 2022 general election, we also had a 32% or nearly 32% of races were unopposed. In some cases, we have seen candidates who lose their party primary choose to run in the general election because that race would be unopposed otherwise. So the sore loser provision in those scenarios could result in more races being unopposed, and that's not a good thing for democracy. In other cases, we have seen candidates choose to run in the general election after losing a party primary because they were locked out of participating in the primary process by the party, which denied them access to party candidate forums and events. If this provision goes into effect, there are 2 ways that we could ensure equal access for all candidates running in that party's primary during a primary process. So having the ability to run in the general election is good recourse for a candidate who feels like they're locked out of the primary. If the committee does choose to go this route and pass this provision, I would also hope that you would consider legislation guaranteeing that political parties grant equal access to all candidates running in their primary. So Vermont has a long and proud tradition of fusion voting. 69 fusion candidates ran in the last election. This is a good thing for our democracy and allows for candidates to truly reflect their values on the ballot while encouraging the political parties to work together. With this in mind, we should not be denying a different political party from running their candidate of choice in the general election just because that candidate lost the nomination of another political party. Which candidates appear on the general election ballot should be up to the candidates and the political parties, and we should not allow the voters of one political party to restrict the members of a different political party from running their candidate of choice. I would ask if this is really something that your constituents are seeking or looking for you to address. I mean, I've watched most of the testimony. I think most people I've heard speak on this are not in favor of this particular provision, and we certainly haven't been hearing this, out when we're talking to folks at the doors. We do know that in general, it's incredibly rare for a candidate to lose a party nomination and then run as an independent or a member of another political party. It maybe happens like once or twice per election cycle. There are even fewer examples of this having a serious impact on the final result of the general election. This change is a solution in search of a problem that does not really exist and is not being asked for by Vermonters as far as I can tell. If we do want to enhance our democracy, encourage greater participation, and ensure that the true will of the voters are being realized, we should pass strong ranked choice voting legislation for all primary and general elections, and I really appreciate the committee's
And we
work to
just
do that. Yes, so thank you for that.
Sorry.
If we did get that passed throughout the state, we would not need to worry about how many candidates appear on the general election ballot, and if their appearance in the general election would cause vote splitting, this would be a non-issue, I think. So yeah, that's one piece. This bill also expands the amount of money available for political candidates to donate to political parties from 10,000 to 60,000. This is also something we very much oppose. Vermonters have made clear time and time again they do not support more money in our political system. This provision would only lead to more money being spent in our elections and could potentially lead to political parties focusing their attention more on wealthy or well-resourced candidates who can afford to contribute the 60,000 maximum to their political party. You imagine a state rep race and a political party recruiting a millionaire because all of a sudden they can give 60,000 to the political party out of pocket because of this. And I don't think that's a good thing. I very much appreciate that this committee has supported public campaign financing in the past and would encourage you to remove this provision and instead explore ways that we can fix and expand public campaign financing in our state. There are many good models for public campaign financing that we would support, but our current system is untenable for candidates and should be replaced with a stronger system that includes down ballot candidates as well. If we are concerned with funding for our political parties, there are a number of places that have implemented public funding of political parties, and this is something that we could explore as well. Yeah, and during this process, we have also heard much debate around the filing deadline for independent candidates. It used to be that the filing deadline was actually after the primary election, but this was changed, I believe, in the last legislative session. 2 years, okay, yeah. So, yeah, I do think that was a mistake, and the committee could revisit that and actually move that filing deadline back to after the primary. And the reason for that is because we have seen, especially in recent situations like in the Franklin County Sheriff's race, that candidates nominated by the political parties don't always reflect the values of their district or even the values of the party they were nominated by. Allowing independent candidates to decide to join the race after the nominees of the major parties are known provides a backstop for situations where the parties do not nominate candidates to reflect the values of their communities. So you imagine, like in the Franklin County scenario, we heard a lot of conversation in the House Government Operations Committee that there was this candidate was nominated as a write-in candidate by both the Democrats and Republicans, and then they found out he had done this bad stuff, and they really had no recourse. So if we move that primary deadline back, at least then there's a possibility of someone else jumping in the race when situations like that occur. So yeah, the last thing I'll speak on is the idea of adding language to this bill to strengthen financial reporting requirements. I really appreciated the testimony and ideas from the Director of Ethics and Ethics Commission. I think we heard that on Wednesday. During my time in this position, I've often been frustrated by the lack of any real consequence for failing to report campaign finance contributions. In one situation a few years back, an unnamed political party spent upwards of $30,000 in a local election, bragged about it on social media, and yet did not report any of the contributions or expenditures. We actually reached out to their chair and treasurer directly to ask them to report, but were ignored. And after several attempts, emailing, calling their chair and treasurer to get them to file, we were left with no recourse but to file a complaint with the Attorney General and Secretary of State. Many, many months later, the AG agreed with us that that happened, issued a fine, disclosed the contributions and expenditures. Had these contributions been public during the campaign, it likely would have been a news story or at least a campaign issue, but voters never had the opportunity to understand who's spending money in their community. So this is a serious and rare example where a fine is actually issued. Far more often, we see candidates not filing. I think 7 Days did a report several years ago now about a certain candidate who didn't file for like multiple election cycles, and the only recourse was that they appeared in a news story. So I really like the idea of adding a fine, even $10 per day. I think that could be a really good solution that doesn't go too far on candidates, but would kind of ding them a little bit and encourage people to file on time. So yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity to testify on H429. Happy to answer any questions.
I just want to clarify the testimony we got on Wednesday, losing track of days, from the Ethics Commission was specific to the financial disclosure form.
Gotcha.
that candidates file when they put in their
Gotcha.
petitions. So we had a brief discussion about, campaign finance and that, and what you just talked
Yeah.
about, but her testimony was specific to that form.
That makes sense, yeah.
Yeah,
So-
but, you know, that doesn't mean we won't think about the other options, but just wanted to clarify, Senator Clarkson.
Yes, because some of us, I think you're very kind, Josh, with just $10 a day.
I know.
It's just the fairness issue and all this chafe, the fact that those of us who are good doomies, you know, but nothing happens.
Yeah.
So I guess I have a question for you about how primaries are used, because this bill does not address something that has bothered me for a long time, which is having people run. I mean, the progressives have a primary, you have major party status so that you can, and you have a primary, and yet most of your candidates don't use it. And they use the Democratic primary. So they use our Democratic primary to get nominated for the general election. And then instead of being DP, because I think fusion candidates are fine, I just chafe at using our primary ticket ballot and then not using us first on the fusion bit.
Yeah.
So that's a tough one for us, and for me anyway. If people want to be progressive, that's great, but then run on the progressive primary ticket. I think you can't have at the moment, everybody, you know, you can have your cake and eat it too, which is a little frustrating for those of us who, it's frustrating. So I support fusion candidates completely. But I really think this is a problem for me, and I'd love to have you address it.
Sure, and yeah, I think it's probably helpful to go a little bit into the history of fusion voting on this. So it used to be that progressives did not run any candidates in Democratic primaries. We actually have provisions like in our bylaws saying that we only support candidates running as straight P candidates. And it was actually Democrats who reached out to us and said, you know, you should run in our primary. I believe Sandy Haas was one of the first ones to do this.
She was
Yeah.
a colleague of mine.
Yep.
She was in my class, 2004.
And the reason that happened is because in that district, the local Democrats were trying to write her in as the Democratic nominee as well. And it got to a point where they were actually asking her to run in the Democratic primary because it was just an easier way for them to resolve that situation. So, you know, I think there's a lot of back and forth on like, you know, progressives kind of running in the Democratic primary and then, you know, running as progressives. It's actually Democrats who reached out to us originally to ask us to do this. And, you know, if we move away from that system, I think what we see is more three-way races, more situations where there are straight Ps on the ballot. And it wouldn't really be good for our democracy. I think we moved towards this because of the desire from many, many people, both on the progressive and Democratic side, to spend more time working together. And this was like a good way to do that. I don't at all think that our current system is perfect. I think it's very, very flawed. I think ranked choice voting is one way, which again, I'm very happy that folks on this committee supported that, is one way that we could begin to address that. But also like our current system does allow and giving candidates the freedom to put a P or a D first, depending on how they run, is a real way to show voters like where their values are. And, you know, we have plenty of candidates who run as D/P as well. And like that is a strong indication of voters that they're kind of small P progressive Democrats who also support the Progressive Party. If candidates run with
I
the
actually
P-
don't think that at all. I'm as progressive a Democrat as you get here. And I don't do that because I honor what primary system I use. And I think that's fine, but I think then if we're going to continue to have this, then people who run on the Democratic ticket should be D/whatever else they want to be.
So and I actually think that would be less transparent because when you
That would be fully, anyway, we can have a discussion,
Yeah, no,
but I
the
think
reason
that's
why-
the thing that really confuses me.
And the reason why that would be less transparent is because our current system allows candidates to indicate what party they're going to caucus. In the House, it allows candidates to indicate what party they're going to caucus with or who they're primarily affiliated with. If you start to say, you know, we're going to require that you run with the D first or the P first or whatever, you know, we're still going to have a House Progressive Caucus, and the voters just won't understand that who's in that caucus and who's not. And that's,
Does it matter? I mean, they're all getting educated about the same bills. I mean, most of the progressives go to the Democratic caucus because there's lots more information going on in the Democratic caucus in the House. In ours, we happily caucus with our progressive colleagues, and that's splendid. Love that. But it is, I don't think the outside even knows what our caucuses are. So I mean, I think, it's like saying to me in September, why aren't you in Montpelier? I mean, most of our constituents have no idea that we don't serve all year round, and that there are different caucuses and that we're being educated differently on policy. I think most people just assume we're educated fully on policy in our committees. Anyway, I just was curious about what your response was to that, and that's helpful. Thanks. I'd forgotten Sandy was the first one. And
Are there other questions for Josh? Because we have other witnesses, so I don't want to. Okay, awesome. Thank you for
Thank
joining
you.
us. We will certainly be continuing with this bill, so stay in touch as we mull it all.
will do. Thanks so much. Appreciate
Thank
your
you.
work.
Paul, you want to join us?
Sure, thank you.
Yeah.
So my name is Paul Dane. I'm the chair of the Vermont Republican Party, and I'll try to keep my comments brief because I know it's Friday afternoon.
It's okay. Take your time.
So I think the first thing I wanted to mention was the sore loser law. As I think about the purpose of primaries and parties is for, and the primary is there to is designed to help the party identify who's our best candidate moving forward. I think that the current provision, restricts anybody from who loses that primary from running in the general election. I think there's also an issue that we had last year with people running in a party's primary and then dropping that label and running as an independent. I heard from a lot of Republicans who felt like, well, wait a minute, why did they run in that primary if they're not going to keep that label?
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot, going back to that, not every voter is as informed as they would probably like to be. We all have busy lives. And so that we saw that this past year as a major, kind of problem with the current system. So I think that it would make sense if we're going to use that sort of loser law expanded to say, if you run in a primary, you should, in a party's primary, whether you win or lose, you shouldn't be running as an independent. So I think that's.
Did you had voters who ran in the Republican primary, won as a Republican, and then changed to being an independent?
They would have if they had clearly understood the rules regarding the independent filing deadline and
Oh,
stuff
they
like
would
that.
have, but they did.
But they didn't know that they had to file. They didn't know what the process was. They were first.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So for the US House race.
Of course. Okay.
Right.
I was like,
Yeah.
got it. Okay.
Yeah.
we got that.
Yeah.
But not in
So
state
diplomatic.
elections. Not in senator.
Well, not that I know of,
Right.
but it certainly could happen. That's usually what happens. Somebody has to be the first. And people see that and they say, oh, there's a strategy I hadn't considered before. So we think when you put your name on a party primary, at least for that election, you should kind of pick a lane, whether you're a Republican, you're a Republican, you're a Democrat, you're a Democrat, progressive, or one of the other minor parties, or an independent. You stay in that lane from the beginning of the filing deadline until the end of the election. And if you don't like that, then next election you can try something different. So including including a prohibition for independents, even if they win the primary. If you win that primary, you should keep that label. The contribution limits is something, there's unlimited contribution from the state parties down to the candidates. So right now, candidates are restricted from sending that money back if there's a case where, hey, we didn't end up needing this money, somebody dropped out or whatever. I don't know that 60,000 really addresses that. My understanding was what I heard from testimony in the House, that it was an opportunity for state candidates especially to sort of do sharing staff resources. I don't know if that really, if 60,000 still is the right amount, for a single term, for a single election. I have some of the same concerns that Josh has, that it creates an incentive for wealthy candidates to get into a race. They can do unlimited contributions to their own campaign, then once it's sort of in the campaign finance system, now I can make a $60,000 contribution. So you create a place where I could have people running for office before the filing deadline, putting $60,000 in, and then sending that to the party, and then never getting on the ballot at all. So, yeah, I think there's some concerns that could be abused without any restrictions in there.
Senator Bihowski?
This may be a question for Will or legislative council, but my understanding is you can absolutely return a donation if you drop out of the race, like, so I guess I'm a little confused. If I got a donation from the party and decided I wasn't gonna run, I can absolutely return it regardless of how big it is.
Right. I just meant there's this inequity between, there's an unlimited amount from the party down. Okay, and then there's not, from a candidate can't send back to the party.
Okay.
As a contribution.
As a
You could
contribution.
as
Yeah,
a
right, if the money-
refund or whatever, if you don't use it.
Right.
Yes, but, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I
Okay.
misspoke on that. Thanks for that question. But, you know, whatever the limit is, or if you keep the limit, it seems that it's one of these rules that it's equally applied across, and, you know, we don't have a problem with it per se. You may want to look at potential abuses there. I think one of the bigger concerns we have is actually the language around reorganization. What we're doing is we're adding new language in here that is requiring the names and addresses of people who belong to a party to become public record. The Secretary of State, I think even in the language there indicates that anybody who signs up for that list will get that information. So, you know, we're talking about all the members of town and county committees for a state party. Could be 1,000, 2,000 names of people's names and addresses that are included in that. And I think one of the questions I have is, when we're giving up that level of privacy, these are basically volunteers on the town level.
Yes.
If we're giving their private information, putting it in a public place where it's publicly accessible, what's the public good that requires us to release on that privacy? Right? If other states, everyone who's registered, right? If you get registered as a Republican or Democrat or progressive, that's public information. It's equal across the entire sort of voting population. But Vermont has decided not to do that. We like to be independent. We like to keep our personal information personal. I think it's totally appropriate. You know, we have the contact information of the state officers. To me, that's a high enough level that it's appropriate to have that contact information available. But as we get down into town committees, some of these people, they meet once or maybe twice in a year to perform, you know, the duties that are required by statute. You know, why do we need to collect that information? I think especially in the times that we're in right now, incredibly politicized times, that if that information is publicly available, people with bad intent can get a hold of that. And you know, not good things can happen. If there's a good reason about why it needs to be publicly available, why we need to know the names of those people, I'd be interested in hearing that case, but I don't see it as clear of a case. Whenever we're giving up people's privacy, I think there ought to be a good reason.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I was gonna ask you a question. Is it, the specific to the addresses that you're concerned about, or just in general, the names and addresses?
I mean, as the names and addresses, you know, I think are concerning, again, at the lower levels especially. You know, people want to, you know, we don't ask for any other sort of public declaration of membership of any party, right? We don't have, you know, we don't ask churches to keep a list of who attends there. We don't ask other organizations like VPIRG. If you're a volunteer for VPIRG, right, your name won't get on a list anywhere. But now people involving in the party we're putting that information, you know, in a centrally publicly accessible place.
Got it. Senator Clarkson.
So Paul, almost everybody's name and address, it's not private. It's public. It's in every phone book.
Mhm.
It's all over the place. It's on the brand list.
Yeah.
I mean, I would hardly call our addresses private.
Well, but being connected to a particular political party is the issue.
I think that Yeah, and I think if you want to, and I think every organization I'm a member of has my address. So I don't think it's necessarily something that needs to be a private thing. I think if you're proud of being a member of that group or that party, you should. Anyway, I don't see that it's such a big problem, but I appreciate your testimony.
Do you have others anything else you want to add or?
Yeah, a couple other
Okay,
things, but
okay.
I'm happy.
Senator Bielski?
I guess I'm wondering if you would sort of consider like the town and county organizing committees to be doing a little bit more work than your day-to-day person in the party and almost sort of akin to like the board for that particular town or municipal or county. Does that feel to you
Yeah.
kind of like,
Well, I think, yeah, as I read the current language, it's every member, which would not necessarily be the committee. Because I saw the word member in there. I don't know if that means officers, if that's what you intend, the word officer might be a better.
yeah, that was certainly how I read it, although now I'm looking at the wrong bill, so this one's not gonna be very helpful for me.
But might be very helpful.
This is
section
town
F.
committee members.
Page.
But and the reason I wonder that is because like your example of Deeper, like, no, they don't publicly put out all their members, but their board is public. And I just feel like when you start to elevate to the
Right.
point where you like have voting capacity and decision-making capacity, like you're opting in to sort of a different level that perhaps you should have some public accountability.
Yeah, and I think that's true at a statewide level. I don't know, right, the town committees don't have a lot of power or influence.
I
I
would
don't
argue
agree.
that is not true.
I would not say that.
Well, it's their privacy that I'm
They do
concerned
if
about.
there's a vacancy that they have to make a recommendation. And that's when they come in, or if they're JPs.
Yeah, JPs, most of them are JPs.
Well, that was what I was, yeah.
Senator Watson.
Thank you. Well, I realize this is, getting into opining about the bill, but I could see that, for boards that we might serve on or be a part of, that our names are out there, but usually the addresses are not associated with that. And I have a lot of hesitation about the mailing addresses, particularly because I know you may not be concerned about it, but doxing is like a real thing and is a threat to people. There's a reason why, some of us choose to have to list our mailing addresses as the State House,
Yes.
or that like in all of the documents that we do at the city level, when volunteers submit resumes, whatever, we redact their mailing address information. And similarly, it makes me think about the time that Mayor Weinberger,
Yes.
I forget what the issue was, but people showed up at his house to protest, and that's
scary.
anyway. Those are things that are just on my radar when it comes to mailing addresses, names, maybe, but just want to.
They're already there.
Okay.
I mean, they're already.
Well, we're gonna have time to debate the bill, so I want to make sure we have time for our witness to finish.
Can I
So,
ask a
yeah,
question
Senator
about
White.
this? Thank you, Madam Chair. So I totally respect where you're coming from on this, and I do think there is some concern with having a party membership list publicly, and we've seen that historically in the United States. So that was a flag I had not considered, but logistically, as someone who's a part of a town committee, it is very helpful to have the information of those folks post that meeting for like an organizing structure. And it's one of the few organizing things we do as committees. And our town committees, at least as a Democratic town chair, we are active folks. And we have people who move and people who come back, and just having this contact information available would be very helpful for me in an organizing capacity. So I'm wondering if you have thought about balancing that as like a benefit to being able to truly be able to organize in a more effective way. And if there is within this list, things like an email address, that just like, are there things that you would be comfortable with being collected? Because we have right now, it's name, gender, age, race and ethnicity, mailing address, and email address.
So-
That's a
That's
different
part of
part.
the bill.
Oh, that's not.
Yeah.
just the-
Yeah, are you gonna get to that now?
I will.
Okay, that's, I think Paul's talking about,
Okay.
section 4,
Section
which
4,
is
yeah.
just the town committee filing when the town
Oh.
organizes filing their town
Right.
committee.
Oh, that's
with
just
the
name and
secretaries.
address.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought that was,
Yeah,
So
and I
just-
think but relative to your question, I think if people are looking for that, the best keeper of that information ought to be the party that's organizing it. I
Yeah.
don't know that, I don't know what the need is to go to the state to get everybody else's information. And, there's a lot of money and data about people, and if we create a new place with probably very valuable information about party affiliation in a state that doesn't have party affiliation, I think the question is, why are we creating that data and making it publicly accessible? What's the public good that it serves? So,
fair enough, thank you.
The demographic info, there's a case where I think the privacy is being protected, right? There's requirements that it's not being released unless it's done in aggregate. So, and it's all voluntary. So I don't have any issues with that. And then lastly, the write-in is another place where we see sort of this unequal distribution. I think it was a fair move to increase sort of the bar that's set for write-ins. It used to be half the number of petitions. Now, then it was raised to the same number of petitions for the office. But the concerning part is now we've added this percentage, which has an unequal application, right? So if you have somebody trying to run the progressive primary and there's 100 progressive voters, and the Democratic primary has 600 voters, we've made it harder for somebody to get on the Democratic ballot as a write-in, and we didn't make it harder on the progressive. So the larger the party is, the higher the bar and the restricted, the more restricted access to that ballot. It seems like we ought to have one number that's across the board for everybody, whether it's 25 or now 50 for House races or higher. There's a case where we use one number across the board. It seems to be more fairly applied there. So,
That's interesting.
and that's all I have. This is any other question.
Excellent.
I
Are there
didn't
any
see
other
it,
questions?
I didn't
Go
see
ahead.
this on our website. Do you have, written testimony for us?
I will submit it.
Okay,
That would be
that'd
great.
very
Yeah,
helpful.
thank you. Senator Clarkson.
So Paul, I serve football in the House. I assume then if you have no further testimony, you support the electronic ballot returns for our military?
Yeah, I think, thank you for asking that. I don't feel like I know enough to be specific about that. I had a couple conversations with Will and JP, and I think when it's, like if you're on a submarine, this is kind of the only way you can vote, right? So I think for military and overseas, it makes a lot of sense. And while I didn't see anything in the bill that indicated that that's where it would be, I think that either there needs to be an understanding with the Secretary of State's office or statute that says, at least for now,
Yeah.
we're going to confine it to that because it is new. And
So pilot, I sort of view it as a pilot.
yeah, and I think if that's what the intent is, because there are concerns about anonymity and access, right? We've done things a certain way, in terms of the people putting paper, pen to paper, and that paper eventually gets here. It's something I really appreciated about Secretary Kondos, was very committed to always having a paper trail. And here we kind of have like a little digital middle section between, we got paper in with digital and then paper out. And I think it's prudent to roll this out slowly, do a pilot program and see what happens, because I don't know that we know enough to know what the potential issues could be. But for folks who have no access without this, I think it's a good place to start. So.
Can you add that last section to your testimony? So we
Yes, I think I did have it in there.
Yeah,
I just didn't
that would
put
be
it in
great.
my handwritten notes here.
All right, any other questions for?
I have to just get a picture of you there. I love the red undershirt.
Yeah, you nailed it with the party colors.
That's my brand.
I hope Jim has blue.
Well, I wear red all the time, as you probably. So, I mean, some of us love red, no matter, I think it's just regal.
Thank you very
All right,
much.
thank you.
Our, Jim is,
Oh, he does have
oh,
blue.
you have blue on, thank goodness, otherwise
Nailed it.
Senator White would have been
Heartbroken.
disappointed. Thanks for joining us, Jim. And I think you've heard the other testimony, but why don't you let us know your thoughts about H 429?
I have, and thank you, Senator Hardy. Thank you, members of the Senate Government Operations Committee. For the record, I'm Jim Dandino. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Democratic Party, and I am here to talk to you about H429, the Miscellaneous Elections Bill. Just a couple of high-level points on the sore loser law. Big picture, we're very supportive. The VDP is very supportive of this whole bill. We feel like it takes a lot of steps to make it easier for folks to vote, to make it easier for folks to have all of the information they need when they are casting their ballots, and to make it easier for us to do our jobs in helping educate voters. On the sore loser law, it is a question of streamlining the election process. The voters have, by the time a general election rolls around, if there was a contested primary, more than half of the voters will have already spoken, I believe, was the proportion from last cycle. And I cannot think of any circumstance where someone has lost a major party primary, caucused their way onto a different ballot line, and then won in the general election. And I could be wrong, but I have no knowledge of that being a circumstance that actually occurred in the past. Really, what it does is it muddies the waters. And the example that I heard in the House that I found pretty compelling was Representative Murwicki. When he first ran, he ran against another Democrat and beat him in the primary. The following year, his previous opponent came back, ran against him again, lost in the primary, but he had a number of his friends write him in on the Republican line. And there was a lot of confusion on the ground in the general election because folks said, we already didn't vote for this guy in the first time. Why is he back? Why is he a Republican? Is he a Democrat? What's the story there? So, I think there is some muddying of the waters that taking away a second bite at the apple might help with. As for the piece about party caucus information, I do want to touch on a point that Paul made, and I'm not going to read my testimony. It's 3:30 on a Friday afternoon. I don't think anybody wants that. But
you'll send it to us, right, Jim?
You're sending.
Yep.
It's already.
Oh, it's already there. Okay.
Oh, it's already sent.
Okay.
Yep, you guys have it. With regards to a point that my predecessor made, where we don't ask for a public declaration of anybody's volunteering, actually we do. We ask for a declaration of affiliation when folks run for office. And in the next year, we're going to be asking for declarations of affiliation from folks as we select delegates to our national nominating conventions, right? There are requirements imposed on us by the DNC, and I'm sure imposed on the Republicans as well by the RNC, that anyone who is an eligible delegate to attend the party's national nominating convention for president needs to be a bona fide member of that party. And this provides an additional data point for us when we're determining that, right? It makes it so that a Democratic town chair cannot go into a Republican primary for state Senate, for example, and try and pass themselves off as a lifelong Republican in an effort to, squeeze a ballot space out from a potential Republican candidate. The other point I want to make on this is this was the law prior to, I believe, 2019. I believe the 2019 party reorganization cycle was the first where parties were not required to submit the names of the people who caucused to the Secretary of State's office. And I will defer to the committee's judgment on the amount and level of accessibility to the information that gets submitted to the Secretary of State's office is. But, I think even if it's just names and towns of the folks who caucus there, I think that is another helpful data point for voters in determining that information. It's another helpful data point to parties in understanding who fits where and in what roles. To jump to the campaign finance limits, I say this in the testimony, but there is some dispute as to what constitutes the sale of a tangible good or service. and where the line is between that and a contribution. And for us, we run into problems because our voter file program for statewide candidates costs $10,000, the same as it does as the campaign finance contribution limit for statewide candidates. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to take a bad faith lawsuit off the table, right? If we, if Senator Allison Clarkson decides to run for governor next year and wants to purchase, not that I'm pushing, I would never.
I mean, I've been
I
asked.
dictate your political future, Senator Clarkson. But if Senator Allison Clarkson decides to run for governor next year, purchases our system from us, and then gives us an additional $10,000 to support staff work on her behalf in the general election, there is a circumstance where someone could take an especially bad faith reading of those campaign finance filings and file a lawsuit and cost us, $40,000 in legal fees. So this is something that we're trying to avoid, while making sure that our candidates can provide the resources that we need to support our staff as we work on behalf of our candidates. The
Hold on. You have
demographic
a
disclosure section. Yes, sorry.
You have a question in the room. So hold on.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably a bunch of different ways to go about the issue that you're getting at, but I wonder if the concern is the $10,000 voting system and the current limit is $10,000, why it's jumping from $10,000 to $60,000 and not 20.
The concern, it's jumping because the initial draft of it aligned state law with federal campaign finance law. Right now, if Allison Clarkson decided to run for United States Senate, she could, if she wanted to, cut us a check for $1 million to support our campaign efforts. And we would have to report that, and we would have to report, she would have to report where that money came from. We would have to report that it came from her. We would have to report how we spent it on our federal campaign finance filings. But there's nothing preventing that from happening. That transfers, the unlimited transfers, are bi-directional at the federal level. So the initial draft in the House had state campaign finance law mirroring the federal law for statewide candidates. I think this was the $60,000 number was part of a compromise amongst House members as that bill worked its way through the process. And obviously, it's not what we were hoping for, but I think it does go a bit of a way further towards addressing the problem that we were concerned with than the current status quo.
Okay. All right, why don't you carry on with your testimony?
All right. I think the demographic disclosure, information disclosure section is fairly self-explanatory. The updated requirements around write-in candidates, I think we're happy with. I will just talk about the electronic ballot return piece. It seems to me that there's some confusion with the folks who have concerns about this piece as to what we're requesting. What the bill, I think, is changing is we're moving to electronic ballot return, not electronic voting, right? We are not going to be sending out a doodle poll to the 935 overseas voters and asking them to fill it out in the 45-day window for voting. We are sending them a ballot. They are filling out that ballot. They are sending it back through a secure portal, and then the normal ballot processing procedures will be followed from there. This is something that's done in, I think, 35 states and territories around the country. You have, deep blue Washington, D.C. and California. You have deep red Texas. This is it's fairly straightforward. It is less complex. And we're talking about a small number of people, but the small number of people are grossly inconvenienced by the current status quo. You're talking about folks who have to find a diplomatic pouch to get their ballots back to the states, or folks who have to pay upwards of $100 in postage, or folks who just can't do it because they're serving, in the Navy, they're overseas or on the seas, on the ocean. So this is, I think, something that works in a lot of other places, and we wholeheartedly and emphatically support the electronic ballot return piece.
Great. Thank you, Jim. Are there any other questions for Jim while we have him? Senator Buhowski?
I don't have questions, but I just want to challenge that anyone who doesn't support electronic voter return doesn't understand that we're not sending a doodle poll. I think there are legitimate security concerns, and that people who are concerned with this method of return understand that it is not a doodle poll that we're talking about. I found that really dismissive of legitimate concerns.
I apologize. I wasn't intending to be dismissive, but I do think that there's a lot of conflation between electronic ballot return and electronic voting. And some of it came from folks that I feel like should have known better or should have been more careful with their language as well. The Democratic Party's stance is it should be easier for folks to vote. It should be easier for folks to run. It should be easier for folks to participate in the process. This is a solution that works in a lot of different places in the country with a wide variety of politics. And I was quite frankly a little bit stunned at how hard folks came in against this provision. And at the same time, how, if in a lot of cases, it seemed like they were arguing against something that wasn't in the bill.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Senator Clarkson?
And just on this, I mean, it's a very limited group of people. I'm really viewing it as a pilot because it's coming down the pike. It's certainly something that's pressing against elections, as Will Senning knows. And I mean, it's there and it gives us an opportunity, I think, to test it out and see if it works. I mean, I think that's really what we're doing.
And we will get more testimony on that specific provision in the bill. We already are lining up witnesses for next week. So we will definitely have more time to consider that and think about it. But for now, it's been a long week. So unless you have anything to add, Jim, thank you so much for your testimony and for joining us. Thanks to Josh and Paul as well. And we are gonna, we have one more matter of business committee, so please don't leave. But otherwise, thanks so much.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks.
Thank you. And thank you for letting me testify remotely.
Our pleasure. Have a good weekend, everyone. And we will come back to this bill. Obviously, there's a lot to discuss. But before we lose the committee, I wanted to, we did not vote yet on Secretary Clauser's appointment. And I was wondering if we could do that, just so we could check it off our list.
Should I make a motion?
Our clerk is ready. Yes, go ahead.
I would move that we, that we recommend for confirmation Kristen Clauser as the Secretary of the Agency of Administration.
Motion has been made. Is there any discussion? Secretary Clauser, Senator Buhowski.
Yes, I'm going to vote yes to support Secretary Clauser, and I'm not going to continue to delay, but I do still have some concerns that some of my questions around the CRF money have not really fully been answered, and that some of the letter that in response to the DCF worker kind of concerns me, but again, I'm not going to stand in the way, but I do have some concerns.
Okay, fair enough. Senator Clarkson?
Did you follow up with her by any chance with an email to see if she did anything on the CRF?
She got me. She had someone get me answers. They just don't really satisfy, like they were sort of like, they just don't really satisfy me that anything's really being done.
Well, we can certainly have her back in
I think we could press on that.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm not gonna stand in the way. Like she did what she said she was gonna do, but like some of the answers made me the answers that she gave me make me uncomfortable. But not enough so to stand in the way.
Okay, so do you feel comfortable voting today? Okay, but we will definitely make a note of that. We want to have her back in and we can sort of get more answers from her. But otherwise, are people comfortable and ready to vote on this?
Yes.
Okay, so the clerk can call the roll.
Senator Buhowski,
Yes.
Senator White,
Yes.
Senator Norris, yes. Senator Watson,
Yes.
Senator Clarkson,
Governor. Senator, well, Senator will cover both. Yes.
Chair Hardy,
Yes.
reporter of the bill.
I will report.
I shouldn't be there.
It's appropriate for you.
Yeah, I will.
I think, and are we trying to get our reports done for you?
Yeah, when do we
by
need
next
ours?
Friday?
Probably next Friday.
Okay.
We didn't do them today, obviously, but
Can we
so.
remind
So be
ourselves?
prepared,
So
'cause I have
you have
mailer.
Secretary Naylor, you have Commissioner Fiston.
I have us to do.
And then I have Secretary Clausen.
Okay.
And
Anybody
then,
else?
Just Governor Clarkson.
Yeah.
It's gonna rain.
and I don't know, we might get a couple more, but maybe not. We could probably take
minor
some from health and welfare, we have a ton down there.